Welcome to Engage360, Denver Seminary's podcast. Join us as we explore the redemptive power of the gospel and the life-changing truth of Scripture at work in our culture today.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Engage360, Denver Seminary's podcast. I am your host, Angie Ward, and we are grateful that you have joined us for today's conversation. My guest today is Ken Allen. Ken is the Executive Director of Denver Area Youth for Christ. He's been in youth ministry leadership for more than 30 years, the last 10 with Youth for Christ, or YFC, and before that with Dare to Share and Youth for Christ DCLA conferences. A little bit about Youth for Christ, if you're not familiar with that ministry. It began informally way back in 1940 when a man named Jack Wurtson held a series of rallies for teens in New York City. And then the first president was a man named Torrey Johnson in 1945. And I think this is interesting. His first employee was a guy you may have heard of named Billy Graham. And so Youth for Christ has a long history. This year, 2024, the Denver area YFC Youth for Christ is celebrating 70 years of ministry in the Denver area. My background is actually in youth ministry. That was my undergrad and master's and original ministry work before transitioning to some of the things I do today. So I am very excited to talk with Ken and to hear his perspective on youth ministry today and how it's changed. Ken, glad to have you on the podcast.
Dr. Ward, thanks for your just hosting, and it's great to be here.
Tell me just briefly how you got involved with Youth for Christ, because you've been with it for many, many years now, with a little break going into Dare to Share, but what first got you connected to YFC?
It was really my wife, Angie. She had been involved with Youth for Christ as a student, and both sides of her family, her dad's side of the family had been involved with Metro Chicago Youth for Christ, Detroit Youth for Christ, and then her mom's side of the family was Kansas City Youth for Christ. So I married my beautiful bride in 1990, and we ended up moving out to Denver for Youth for Christ, being called into full-time ministry. And part of my story is I was reached as a college student through Campus Crusade for Christ. And so that placed a calling on my life, wishing I would have been reached earlier in middle school or high school age. And so that's part of my story and part of my calling.
Yeah, so Youth for Christ today, tell me just a little bit, just a brief overview of the types of ministries it did. I mean, I know there was a season where YFC, Crusade, Campus Life is what I was involved in, Young Life.
Yes.
You know, they would meet in clubs.
Right.
And, you know, with maybe headquartered at different schools. What's kind of the nature of YFC's work today, especially Denver area?
Yes, yeah, great question, Angie. And for us, it is Campus Life is still around. We still work in high school and middle schools. We're in the schools and then have clubs and inviting teenagers to that. Denver Area Youth for Christ, we've been involved in the juvenile justice ministry since the 60s, having chaplains at the different detention centers around the metro area. And that's also something that Youth for Christ does nationwide. And then we work with teen parents, parent life, and then a city life model, more of inner city, neighborhood type ministry. And so we're excited locally here. We're getting ready to open up a new youth center in Aurora that's been the most violent zip code in the last 4 years in the Denver area. So we're really excited about having a space for kids.
Wow. Well, so what have been some of the biggest changes you have seen when working with youth over your career? It's been a long career now focused on youth ministry.
Yes, I've got some gray hair to prove it. So what I've noticed, Angie, and for people listening, I've just noticed that there's been a new sense of anxiety and loneliness and isolation. I think these phones contribute to that. I think they feel like they're connected, but it's kind of a false connected. I just even saying good morning to students in a high school or a middle school, I'll startle them as they're looking up from their phone, and I think there's just an isolation, social media, all of the different parts of it, and so that's what I've noticed is there's just not as many opportunities to connect with one another in real meaningful relationships.
You said largely like phones. What role did the pandemic play in that? Did that just accelerate something that was already we were trending toward?
Yeah, I think so, and it really exasperated it. And when we talk to students and when we invite them to come to activities or when we're building relationships with kids and we said, hey, bring some friends, the pandemic, they would answer, I don't have any friends. And they weren't lying. You just talk to the number of kids that just really didn't have friends, and isolating kids for a year and a half, and this remote learning, kids got lost in the shuffle. And I think it's really an awful thing that happened, certainly for all of us, but for kids especially. I mean, I know how awkward it was for me to go from middle school to high school. These kids were in isolation and going to a brand new school in a high school, and they were doing it in remote learning environments. And so they would step in when they finally got back to go to school. They really didn't have community or relationships.
So how does that affect how you do ministry? I mean, because everything I'm reading and experiencing, people still need connection, they need communion, but more and more isolated. So how do you reach them? Do you need to convince them of their need for it? What's the inroads that you found are working these days?
You know, Angie, I think that for us, and this is where some of the shifts with Youth for Christ, before it was rallies and we would invite kids to come to what we're doing, and even DCLA conferences, we'd invite them to come to what we're doing. Now it's much more, as a youth ministry, we're going to where kids are. We have to go into their spaces, and whether that's social media, whether that's at a high school or middle school campus, whether that's a detention center or a neighborhood, we need to go there. And the one thing that I've loved about teenagers, no matter what, they're resilient and they will share with you what is going on, but they just want to know that they are seen and that they matter. And when I think of Jesus, I think of the many times he just asked great questions. And I think that's part of what we need to continue to get better at in youth ministry, is continue to ask really good questions of the teenagers that we work with and have the chance to come across. Really let them know that they matter. Let them know that they're seen and that they're heard. And part of that is asking questions, not to have an agenda and what we want to do, but really inviting them into a conversation.
So how does this change how you recruit or train staff? I would imagine, if you're having to look at a whole different model of connecting with kids, you may also be looking for different type of characteristics of folks who are working with those kids. So how has that changed your recruiting, leadership development, staffing for these new kinds of needs in this new world?
Yeah, it's really important, and when we talk to staff, and when we talk about some of the training, it's how do you engage students where they are? What are the questions? What are the things that you can engage them in, and really be creative in that, and help them understand that we can learn as much from teenagers as they can learn from us, and just having that learning attitude and wanting to grow in that together. I think that's part of the training, part of the recruiting, and really helping, staff and volunteers, ministry leaders, really engage students in what that looks like. And it does not matter what age. We have ministry leaders. We've had people that will say, gosh, I'm in my 60s, I'm in my 70s, what can I do? Well, your presence does matter. And being present with a teenager is so huge. And they will respond when they see that you care about them.
Yeah. I have a cousin who works actually with Young Life overseas now in Europe, in a very postmodern, post-Christian country, and she had come from that type of youth ministry, teen ministry in the Bible Belt. And so she said one of the things that has struck her about ministry over there, she said, here we just kind of assumed that people would respond and there would be this big harvest. Like you could see someone, a teenager, through from freshman to high school, and you could see some growth and some fruit from your ministry. She said, here I'm realizing my job over many years may be to plant, and I never see any fruit from that. Is that something you're experiencing here too in Denver in the United States?
Yes, and for sure. And for us, part of our mission is to raise up lifelong followers of Jesus. And so if we can plant those seeds, if we can continue to come alongside, it'll take years. In fact, there was one young man that we had the privilege of baptizing in February in one of the local churches here. He had been in part of campus life when he was 7th grade. And it took until his sophomore year of high school to really come to this saving faith and that knowledge of who Jesus is and say, yes, I want to get baptized. And so the longevity of ministry, Angie, I think is really important. And for us to to realize it's not about putting a notch in our belt for kids to just say yes to Jesus. It's about an ongoing walking alongside kids and deep, deep ministry. And I think it's a little bit different mentality than I think some that we've had over the years in youth ministry. And so really walking alongside and really helping them in the highs and lows and everything in between, and letting them really discover their faith journey in this is really important.
Yeah, so this shift that you talked about and said maybe even a bit of a surprise from, the history of YFC 70, in Denver 70 years, even further back, Chicago and New York, and kind of that idea of crusades or rallies and gatherings. And then when you joined, over 30 years ago, staff, but also came to Christ through that. Was this kind of a gradual transition, or were there some hard shifts with YFC or for you in seeing these things? Was there some aha moments or events? Like you were doing a bunch of big events. DCLA when I was a student was the big thing, and
Yes.
now that event-based stuff, people just aren't doing it. What were some of the kind of the turning points or awareness points?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it is we saw that, DCLA is no more. You think of the big Promise Keepers rallies. You think of even some of what Dare to Share has shifted to with more online. They're not doing the conferences around the cities. They're not as sustainable, I think, financially for a ministry. And then I think there's also this part of big events still have a unique place in the story of teenagers because they make commitments and they realize they're not alone. But I think to be effective and to continue to walk alongside, I think there was a shift that happened kind of in the early 2000s. And it seems that way with Promise Keepers, DCLA, some of the conferences, we just don't have as many conference ministries. I think that's when it shifted. And Youth for Christ really, and I think Young Life and our other friends, we've always been in relationship with kids, but it has to be a shift, and it's on their terms. It's on their turf, and we're going to where they are. So even you asking about how do we train staff, well, they have to feel comfortable walking onto a high school, middle school campus. They have to feel comfortable going to where kids are. And I think that shows them just the respect, but also the ability to meet them where they are. And I think that's part of, when I think of Jesus, he goes into Samaria, he's going into places that no one else would go to. And that's what I love about YFC is we're trying to reach kids that are not going to walk into a church. They're just not. They don't have that background. Their families, they haven't been raised in that. And so for us, it is a call to wherever kids are, we're going to go and we're going to meet them where they are.
Yeah, so that thread, I want to pull on that a little bit about, like you said, you're going to reach kids that aren't going to step foot in the door of a church, and churches are realizing that come and see isn't necessarily working either, and have to do new models, and rethink things and mindsets. How would you describe YFC's relationship to the church or to a local congregation? How do you view that? How do you talk about that with church leaders, with pastors, and even with students? How do you say? It's important to get connected in a local church at some point because YFC can kind of become their church, or that's all they know, at least, of the body of Christ. Right. So I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, Jesus didn't say he was going to build his 501c3, so he's going to build it on the church. And for us, we want to have intentionality with working with the local church. In fact, we work with 40 plus congregations here in the Denver area as true partners in ministry, because when we reach students that come to faith and we're walking alongside them, the next step is to really say, this is the body of believers that you need to be plugged into. And if we don't do that, then we've really failed our mission, because we want to partner with the local church. They have resources that we just don't, and really it's very clear that they can help disciple and walk alongside students as they're continuing to grow in their faith. So for us, we take that very seriously about being able to work with the local church. So for us, practically, having youth leaders be a part of our breakfast on a campus, on a school where we're doing campus life. We can be that conduit for a church to go into a juvenile facility to lead a Bible study. And so the kids are actually meeting people within the church, and they have those relationships, and then they ask, like, what church do you attend? And then they follow up when we follow up with them to plug them into that local church. So there's some practical ways that we try to do that with the local church.
Yeah, that's great. Tell me more. I'm intrigued by what you're doing in the juvenile justice system. So what does that ministry look like?
Yeah, that ministry, again, we've been doing it since the 60s. And back in the day, the state of Colorado actually, they paid for chaplaincies within, they said this is a worthwhile and important ministry to reach kids that are in jail. And I think of when Jesus says, you saw me when you fed me, you saw me when I was in jail, you visited me in prison. Those are the types of things we take very seriously. And kids being incarcerated, it is a unique ministry. It can be hard, but you're also reaching kids that are at a pretty low point in their lives. And it's just been a great and wonderful, fruitful ministry. In the 80s, the state of Colorado said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to pay for a chaplain. And Youth for Christ said, this is still worthy of us to have chaplains. So we've continued that process. It's leading weekly Bible studies. It's leading Sunday services. It is one-on-one chaplain visits. It's mentoring. And it's coming alongside kids that are, again, in a place that can be very lonely, very isolating, and a chance just to really reach them and say, you matter, and we love you, and we care for you.
So the prison system, they still allow it, they just don't fund it.
They don't fund it, but they have acknowledged, YFC, what we have is we really have a great relationship with the state and the individuals that work in this space. In fact, if there is anybody from a faith-based community that wanted to do something on these facilities, their response would be, well, you need to talk to Youth for Christ. And they kind of view us as the credible witness for that place, for the place, and they really want to hold it just with respect with the kids. And there's certain rules, obviously, you have to follow in a juvenile facility. And so we take that relationship very seriously, and we want to minister not only to the kids, but to the workers there and to those that we come into contact with. We want to be credible messengers, and we want to represent Christ well in those spaces.
Yeah. What about relationships with schools? How has that changed? You talk about going to students, to their turf, to schools and events, that type of thing. How have those changed over your time, and what are you seeing there?
Here's what I'm going to say across the board, Dr. Ward, and I would say this to everyone listening. The reality is that we are having more principals, more people, more judicial districts, court systems asking us to come in and inviting us to come in because they are so overwhelmed with the needs and the problems that are happening that they just want anyone to come in and step into those spaces. And even an organization like Youth for Christ, Campus Life, they invite us in to those spaces because they are overwhelmed. And I've talked to principals. They tell me, we are grateful you're here because we have so many needs right now and the kids need us something like this. And so the opportunity, I feel like, is like never before. If you want to talk about opportunities for us to grow in youth ministry, I think the opportunities are there. We just have to step in boldly and know that Jesus has called us to these spaces, and we're actually getting invited into these spaces because of the needs. The needs are so great, and administrators, schools are just overwhelmed with what's happening.
Yeah. What about, and you also do, I think, with young moms, young mothers. What is that? Tell me more about that ministry.
Yeah, that's really a neat ministry. It's called Parent Life, and it really started here in Denver. Jill Meyer is still on our staff. Back in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, she was our juvenile justice chaplain up in Lookout Mountain. And at the time, there was boys and girls, and there was a lot of teen moms in the prison system, in the juvenile detention centers. And she asked the director there, she said one day, what are we doing for teen moms? How do we help them, just train them to be good moms or just come alongside them with practical needs? And the director said, we don't have anything, but why don't you start it? And so Jill started this Parent Life ministry here in Denver. And then it just blossomed and grew across the country with Youth for Christ. And so I'm very proud. I'm proud that Jill is still a part of our team. And it works with teen moms to, sometimes it hasn't been modeled for them and of just what it looks like to be a good mom and how to do some of the things. And there's a lot of challenges with that. Obviously, we want to come alongside not only with with the spiritual side, but with practical needs, with moms and teen dads to help them and just encourage them with where they are, because they've grown up really fast. And I guess that's another part of what I see in some of the changes. I think youth today have grown up pretty fast. I think the moment you hand a cell phone over to your kiddo, they're exposed to a lot of things. And I think some of the childhood of many of the young people we work with has kind of been taken or stolen from them, because they've just gone into adulthood really, really quick.
Yeah. When you're hearing about and reporting on the work of Youth for Christ, like, what would you describe as like a win, or this is why we do what we do? Tell me a story or example of that.
I think for us, it's a win when a kid calls us and maybe they're in crisis, but we're one of the first calls they make, and they know that we're going to show up. I think of the teen mom who just in June called our director in the middle of the night saying, "I'm getting kicked out by my boyfriend, and my child and I have nowhere to go." And our director jumps in and goes and meets this young lady with her baby and finds a place for them to stay and be safe. I just think of these long-standing relationships that we have with kids, and I think it's just the fact that they trust us and they know that we will show up no matter what the circumstances. And I think a win for us is when that we've changed the narrative of what they think of Christians. I think our staff and our ministry leaders do a wonderful job of not judging, but coming alongside saying we love you, and we all make mistakes, and we want to support you. And so I think that is really a win for us. A win for us is just being an authentic relationship with kids. And that's what we measure. It's not how many kids come to Jesus, even though this last year was 260, but we work with 1,216 teenagers where we know their name, we know their story, we've heard their story, and we're bringing Jesus into the conversation. But it's all in relationship. Authentic Christ-sharing relationships is what we measure, and those are the wins that we have.
Yeah, that's great. Obviously, some of these teens that you're describing come from difficult situations or even are incarcerated, that type of thing. There's somewhere in there's parents, how connected they are or not with those kids or with Youth for Christ. What do you view as your ministry or connection and relationship with parents?
Yeah, that's a great question. We want parents to be engaged in what we're doing. In a lot of cases, they're not. I will tell you, in the course of my 11, 12 years with Denver and mentoring 19 to 20 different young men, I've only had maybe one or two that have dads. So I'm working with grandparents, I'm working maybe with the mom. And so for us, we want to be very much engaged in being a part of, just helping them understand who we are. And we want to have relationships with them. They welcome us into that because they're overwhelmed with the need. And they are grateful that someone will take the time and the energy and the effort to walk alongside their granddaughter or their grandson or their son or daughter. And so it's a beautiful relationship because we really have the opportunity to change multiple generations through faith, especially with teen moms. And that's one of the things Jill has talked about. She loves the fact that if we can reach a teen mom, we're not only going to reach her, but we could reach, the baby that she has, and also her mom or grandparent that's there. You can really change a multiple generations in the ministry that we work in, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. You use the word reach. How would you define that?
I think reach is a heart connection. I think it's a heart connection and a chance to share in honestly how faith has impacted my life or our lives, and really having a chance to impact a young person and reaching them with the gospel, presenting it in a way that is, that's not critical, it's not harsh, it's kind. I think of God as very kind and gentle, and I think when we reach someone and they hear it, and they hear it clearly, and it's something that they receive, I think it's just such a gift and a beautiful thing. And I think of even my own story, which is hearing the gospel for the first time so clearly, but it was from somebody that was kind to me and walked alongside me. And I was ready to receive it. So that's what I think of reach. I think of kindness. I think of God's heart in this. And I think of relationship too, that we've reached them in relationship where they trust us to hear the message.
Yeah. Trust is a recurring theme for sure that I'm hearing as well, and relationship. Well, so looking ahead, what do you think? You've described some of the problems and the changes. What do you see for teens and for how we do youth ministry in the next 5, 10, 20 years? What do you think it's going to look like?
I think the opportunities are like never before, honestly, Dr. Ford. I think teenagers are ready for this. I think teenagers are wanting to find something real. I think they have been navigating a lot of just kind of junk out there. And I think they will be truthful and honest. They're just trying to find, they're open to it, but they want it to be the real thing. Like that's one of the things I love about teenagers is they can call it out if they don't sense it or feel it or just, there's something out there that's not right. They'll call it out. And they question organizations. They question the establishment, and that goes from everything from church to politics to all of it. They don't trust the systems that have been in place for a long time. And so for us in youth ministry, I think it's an opportunity. I think, as Jesus said, the workers are few, but the harvest is plentiful, and I believe that. I believe that now more than ever. And we just have to continue to step boldly and faithfully and continue to show up. Don't give up. Continue to show up in kids' lives and meet on their terms and discover and be willing to have this heart of humility, walking alongside and learning. We have a lot to learn. And where it goes from here, I don't know. I don't know necessarily. I don't consider myself an expert. What I consider myself is somebody that's going to continue to persevere, somebody that's going to walk alongside kids and continue to be an advocate for teenagers because I love them and it's part of my calling. And so for those that are listening, anytime you want to step into a life of a teenager, no matter how old or young, please do it. If God's stirring in your heart, do it, because we need more people that are truly called to work with youth in our communities.
Yeah, I would echo that. In youth ministry, in church, church ministry, and a lot of times, it's the young adults right out of college, and then at some point they either leave that for, quote, a real job or a real pastorate or whatever. My youth pastor is just retired from youth ministry at, I think, 71, 72. And so I like what you're saying about just this notion that disabusing the notion that youth ministry is just for young adults, that what you're saying, that any of us at any age have something we can offer.
Yeah.
And a wisdom that I've seen, certainly, among, folks with white hair like us and others. And it's really, I think that's part of being the body as well, and not just segregating. That brings me another question. So youth ministry for a very long time, we had the rise of youth culture, post-World War II, the baby boom, and then that led to all these, youth ministries being started. Churches started doing youth ministries. It was very age segregated, and so obviously Youth for Christ still focuses on kids or teenagers. What are the ways we can continue to integrate all ages and that wisdom and that full family and body of Christ, through the ministry of Youth for Christ with churches? Where does that happen, or where should it happen?
Yeah, and that's another great question. We work with 11 to 19-year-olds. The reality is, though, that kids are still incarcerated in the juvenile facilities until they're 21, before they're moved into the adult system or whatever. So we still work with kids that are 20, 21. And one of our staff just took a kid and his brother, they're 24 and 25 right now. That's what I love about YFC, is that we continue to walk alongside them. And even though we kind of have this lane that's 11 to 19-year-olds, we're never going to cut a kid off or a young person off. Oh, hey, you're 20 now. Sorry, you have to, move on to the next thing. I think churches could do well to think about that. Because I do see this, these kids that will graduate from high school and then they go in and they're like, okay, now what's next? And they get into college and things kind of get a little wonky, and they're trying to find their footing faith-wise, and then they potentially lose it. I'll just say that my wife and I host a young adults group. I'm going to be hosting it at my house here in a couple hours. and they're 20 to 27, 28-year-olds, and they desperately want community. And they continue to show up every week and connect with one another. And so reminding the church, reminding us that what we're investing in is not the church of tomorrow, they're the church of today. So how do we incorporate them into the church of today? And not just do it lip service, but really incorporate them into our churches, into our ministry. For us, I think, after we work with kids, having them come back on and as staff and as ministry leaders, we've had that. We've had a lot of young people that we work with that will come back as ministry leaders and staff, and I'm really proud of that we are modeling it and we're serving in that way, and yet they see this is a call that I could give back to. But I do think it's a great question. I don't know if I have all the answers, but I do think it's something we have to acknowledge, that it's a real need, because it's this hard cutoff after high school, and yet we are losing that age group. They don't come back to the church, and that's really something that we should be addressing.
And I would guess that's not just a Youth for Christ thing. That's something that, when you're focused on any type of youth ministry or age stage stuff like that, correct?
Yes, for sure. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the other part is that even what we talked about, the relationships, people desperately want to have relationships, no matter, even if they're introverted or extroverted, they want to find community. And that's how God designed us. I mean, God is a relational God, and He designed us that way. And we are meant to be in relationships. So how can we do that where it's intentional and it's life-giving to those that we're serving in our community?
Yeah. Well, last question. What's the thing that gets you most excited to get out of bed every morning with your work with Youth for Christ?
What I'm excited about is trying to get people out of the stands and get them into the game. I think we have a lot of people that show up to churches week in, week out, that listen to a great sermon and have some praise and worship, and then they go back to their lives. And what I get excited about is just continuing to beat the drum to say, you can get into the game right now locally. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to get on a plane and fly internationally somewhere to do a missions trip overseas. We have people here in our community that need you, that want you, and there's a gap there. And so that's what gets me excited, is trying to get men and women out of the stands and into the game. And if we would be the body of Christ, if we truly would be the body of Christ, then all needs would be met. I believe that, because I think we are better together than we are by ourselves. That is what I have believed to my core. That's how God designed me, and I think that's how God of the universe designed us, to step up and be the body of Christ. So what gets me excited is when I can share this mission, or I can share this passion, and invite others to be a part of it, because they can be a part of it at any time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Ken, it's so good to chat with you, and thanks so much for sharing your passion and also just the ministry of Youth for Christ in Denver and beyond, and your heart for teens and for youth ministry. So it's just been great to have you as a guest.
Thanks, Angie, so much.
Friends, we are grateful that you've chosen to spend some time with us. If you get the chance, please leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. And please send any questions or comments to us at podcast@DenverSeminary.edu. You can also visit DenverSeminary.edu for more information and resources about Denver Seminary, including events, degree programs, and other episodes of Engage360, including full transcripts if you'd rather read than listen. We are very grateful for your support and interest and prayers. Until the next time, may the Lord bless you.